Welcome to Freedom Watch. The Liberty Power Hour is on. A 60-minute injection of raw liberty streaming from the highly acclaimed Strategy Room at FoxNews.com. I'm your host, Judge Andrew Napolitano. We'll discuss the issues that profoundly affect your freedom, your civil liberties, your financial liberties, and your right to have a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution. Are you ready for this? The Federal Reserve is now threatening the American people with higher interest rates if Congress continues to attempt to expose its private, super secret, and unregulated methods. You know what the Federal Reserve is. It's a semi-private bank. Its board of governors is appointed by the president, but it is privately owned. The amount of its wealth, the loans that it makes, the foreign governments it has shorn up, and the debts that it has incurred have all been kept from you. Why should you know what the Fed has done and what the Fed is doing? That's easy. It prints your money. It controls your interest rates. It is the lender of last resort to your government. Late last week, a guy you probably never heard of, Donald Cohn, the vice president of the Fed's board, went before Congress and said, quote, "The bond rating agencies view operational independence of a country's central bank as an important factor in determining sovereign credit interest rates." Translation, he's suggesting that any threat to the Fed's privacy and independence could lower the Treasury's debt rating and thus raise its cost of borrowing. In other words, Congressman Ron Paul's House bill, H.R. 1207, the bill that would audit the Fed, the bill that has over 250 co-sponsors in the House, is a direct threat to the independence and the privacy of the Fed. The Federal Reserve so fears that an audit will undermine its secretive ways, expose its numerous misdeeds and its mega grand theft scams, that it will hold you responsible for this. This is plain and simply extortion. The Fed is basically saying, audit us and we will raise your interest rates. No one in the government should ever be able to threaten to perform such an act. The threat to perform a lawful act for an unlawful purpose, that is extortion. And that's what the Federal Reserve is threatening to do if Congressman Paul's bill in the House of Representatives passes. This is similar to the threats that the Fed made to banks that initially rejected TARP funds. Take our TARP funds or we'll audit you. H.R. 1207 in the House and S. 806 in the Senate are the only practical hope for any form of transparency and the only means by which Donald Cohn and Ben Bernanke and the rest of the bankers that hold us hostage can be held accountable. It's my pleasure to introduce my good friend and one of the great defenders of freedom and liberty in Congress, in the United States, and on the planet today. Congressman Ron Paul joins us from our nation's capital. Congressman, we couldn't start the show without you. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you. Good to be with you again.
Six might actually come to pass would threaten the American people with higher interest rates if we dare try to audit them.
Well, Judge, about two-thirds of your question, I think, was canceled out, but I heard your opening statement, and that's essentially what it is. It is extortion and threats and scare the people, but that's the way government generally works, whether it's an economic calamity or an international calamity. It's always to scare the people, intimidate them, and make sure that the people know that if they don't do the bidding of the powerful elite, then worse conditions can exist. But how can truth ever be harmful? You know, truth shouldn't be harmful. Hiding the truth doesn't really change the truth. And this idea that if we don't know what the Fed has been doing, it's going to make us feel better. You know, for instance, I think one thing that an audit might reveal would be all the communication between the Fed and Goldman Sachs. Just think of what kind of communications we might find there and what kind of promises were made and how Goldman Sachs came out so golden. But that should be available to us. If there's a lot of power in the hands of the Federal Reserve officials. We ought to know how they're using that power. What kind of promises do they make overseas? I came across a statement the other day where the Fed officials during the Pan American credit crisis a decade or so ago had the IMF pay the interest to the New York banks, and the Federal Reserve did it. They're the ones who went to the IMF. So those are the kind of things that go on, and the American people deserve to know about this, because if they destroy the money as they destroyed the financial system, we need to know who's at fault and what we ought to do to correct it.
Congress, by saying if you pass Ron Paul's bill in the House and Jim DeMint's bill in the Senate, we're going to raise interest rates on everybody. Doesn't that sort of cause Congress to dig in its heels? I mean, can any entity really successfully threaten the Congress? If you do this, we'll do that back to you?
Well, too often the Congress has become intimidated. The president is a very, very powerful person, and he represents a special interest. Obama, his biggest donor was Goldman Sachs. So, yes, there's a lot of power they can wield. It shouldn't be that way. The Congress and the Congress members ought to be defending the people. So therefore, the pressure has to come from the people. That's why we have a lot of co-sponsors. It's not so much that all of a sudden I got more persuasive or the issue became more important. The American people woke up and said, look, we want more transparency. We want to know what's going on in the Federal Reserve.
I think you're being modest, but I'm thrilled that you have so many co-sponsors. What's the status in the House? What would be the next step to translate the fact that you have more than half of the co-sponsors into a movement of the bill through the process that it has to go through in the House before it can get to a vote by members of the House?
Well, it all depends on those in power and what they want to do. For instance, if Obama wanted it and Pelosi wanted it, they could bring it up on the floor tomorrow under suspension, and it would pass, and that would be it. And then the burden would be on the Senate. But they don't want it. You recall what they did with DeMint's bill. They ruled it out of order. So the most I think we can expect right now is to get a portion or the major part of this put on a bill that Barney Frank's working on, for redoing all the regulations. But that doesn't assure us much. I'm afraid, and I'm preparing and conditioning myself and everybody else, that when push comes to shove, they're going to pay token. They're going to give us a token effort to support this. But in reality, we won't know in 1 year from now what's going on behind the scenes. And that to me is discouraging. But I still work with the assumption that we can and should get it passed in the House, and we have to keep putting pressure on the Senate. We have to try to make this system work, because it's a calamity if it fails. So therefore, we have to continue the process. But for me to say, well, we have the large majority, pretty soon we're going to have 2/3 of the Congress at the rate we're going. And if we can't get this passed, we have to, put more pressure somehow or another to let the people know what's going on.
The shows like this one and the others on which you appear will continue to educate the public about what needs to be done. This morning on my radio show, I was ranting and raving, Congressman Paul, about what happened in the House yesterday. Did the leadership yet again spring another 1,000-plus page bill on members of the House? And did they yet again, without reading it, vote for it? And does it yet again do the unthinkable, which is to raise taxes on employers in a time of recession?
No, this is business as usual, and they don't want those kind of bills to see the light of day, so they come up quickly. They don't get truly exposed and truly debated. So hopefully, we have more exposure for this medical bill that's coming through, that revamping. But then again, some of the issues that do see the light of day and a lot of debate, what will happen the night before they're brought to the floor, when they go to the Rules Committee, they'll have a manager's amendment which can rewrite the whole bill. That's essentially what happened on the Patriot Act. They had been debating, it had been in committee.